Everybody, welcome back to the Gridiron and Growth Podcast. I am your co-host, Benny Fowler, along with my other co-host, Ryan Harris, best-selling author, speaker, champion in life, dad, husband, just an incredible guy. And today we have Pratik Patel, aka Teak, one of my good friends that has been on my journey with me since Michigan State. You know, he helped us beat up on Notre Dame because, you know, he gave us proper nutrition, training, all the regimens to help us be stronger and better.
On, man.
Just make it such an incredible university. So Teak, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. And, you know,
you about to say something?
No. Just, you know, I had a Notre Dame joke, but I just wanted to let it fly because you already beat up on him.
Yeah. Thank you. God thanks you too.
Appreciate that.
You're going to have to answer for all that.
Appreciate that. Well, Teak, man, let's dive into a conversation about health, wellness, longevity, performance in the NFL, in college. I know on social media you make fun of the fact that you are an Indian with small legs. But what got you into this space and what got you into health and wellness, longevity, and performing at the highest level?
Yeah, it started when I was a lot younger. You know, like a lot of kids get thrown into sports, you love playing it, but, you know, I succumbed to what a lot of youth athletes or teens are going through with very long periods of sedentary life. So it was around the time, like, I was just getting into video games. I wasn't that great with the sports I was playing growing up. So started to gain weight, you know, had access to whatever food under the sun, you know, in our Indian household. One big thing about us is there's always going to be food around, and, you know, parents and family members are going to throw food down your throat, even though you need it or you don't. So heading into middle school and high school, I started to gain weight. And, you know, I grew up in a very mid to high SES area. And I was always the different kid. You know, I'm the Indian kid and I don't look like everybody else. So one, I'm already different. Two, I look a little bit differently too. So I'm not as popular. I'm a little bit introverted. You know, I just wasn't having a good time. And understanding, like, look, this is a very impressionable time in your life. You're either popular or not. You know, you either get made fun of or you're the person being, you know, making fun of others. So what I wanted to do was like, look, no one's going to come save me. You know, if I want to feel better about myself, if I want to have a better social standing, then I got to do something about it. You know, maybe getting back into sports is the way to do that, because everybody loves, you know, the football players, the track athletes, the basketball players. They're all the ones hanging out with the pretty girls. And I'm like, I want to be like that. You know, I don't want to be this awkward Indian guy with tiny calves, but now I'm just very detrained and I'm not in good shape. So did everything wrong, you know, reading magazines, talking to the GNC guy, you know, try to figure out what is it that I need to do, because I want to look like the guys on the magazine covers. I don't want to look the way I look. So, you know, fortunately, the poor decisions I made ended up for me to really get a chance to transform my body. And I fell in love with training in that journey, in that process. You know, I was able to play sports. So played a couple years of football. I was very mediocre, to say the least, like mediocre high school football in Kansas. That's not very good.
What position?
I was a receiver corner, you know, 5'7" or 5'8". You know, I don't think I hit my full growth spurt. Probably a whopping like 150 pounds, soaking wet, just, you know, this oblong, long dude with long arms and long femurs, and then ran track too. So it wasn't actually playing sports. It was the training, it was the camaraderie that I really fell in love with. And I'm like, okay, if I made this change and this improvement to my health and my social status and my confidence just by doing X, Y, and Z, eat well, you know, prioritize nutrition, and just compound this day after day after day, like other people could do this too. You know, maybe there's something with learning about it in school, having a career in the space. So I went to K-State for undergrad and grad school, studied dietetics, studied exercise physiology. And the funny thing was, I thought my end goal was I'm going to be, you know, a registered dietitian, and I'm going to be working in a gym doing personal training and like meal plans. I'm like, this is the life that I'm going to lead. And as I went through the curriculum and started learning a lot more, recognizing like, hey, there's just this massive area in activity and sports and health that you could potentially have a career in, you know, learning about strength and conditioning coaches that work with athletes of all ages, you know, dietitians, athletic trainers. And so I started to get some internship experience, and, you know, one thing led to another. When I was back at grad school, I started doing some coaching. So fitness coaching, strength and conditioning. And then I started working with the men's basketball team as an intern, got my chops there. And from there, I got my first gig, you know, working at Michigan State, where lo and behold, I met Benny. So first year was that 2013 season, 2012, my fault. 2012, which is the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl win. And then 13, which was that Yeah, 7 and
Typical
6,
for
but
Michigan State. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a great learning experience because really getting immersed with working with athletes and really seeing like, what is it that they need to be doing on a day-to-day basis? What are their actual behaviors and habits? And how does this translate to them having success? Who's having success for what reason and who's not having success for what reason? Because in health and wellness and fitness and coaching space, we all think that the knowledge we have and the coaching abilities we have is going to save the world. But ultimately, we can only do so much with the resources and within the framework that we're given. So I think that was a very good learning experience because Michigan State was a very like hard-nosed program. It wasn't fancy gadgets and technology. It was like, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're about. This is what we're going to do. We're going to smack you in the mouth. We're tough, we're resilient. And lo and behold, 2013 was such a great year. Like I'll always remember that. I will always say to this day, the greatest team that I ever worked with was that 2013 team, hands down. Like we got robbed completely in South Bend.
Day.
Like, yeah. Everybody, like I will say it till I'm blue in the face. Like,
well, I think we had like 9 pass interference calls that game. We won't dive into that, but I mean,
yeah,
against defensive pass
Trey Waynes and Darquez Leonard, two guys that were in the league.
We had 2 first-round corners on that team.
2 first-round corners. Like, come on, man.
Cheating.
We're in South Bend. They don't need any extra help. Come on.
They had Big Ten refs. We had Big Ten refs. Well, while we continue in the health and wellness space, Teak, just real quick, maybe for me, maybe for some other listeners, what's the best way to burn fat?
You got to be in a caloric deficit. Like no matter what anybody tells you, you have to be expending more energy than you're taking in. So ultimately, the best way to do that is everybody thinks like, oh, I have to exercise 6, 7 days per week. That's not the greatest thing. Controlling your diet is going to be a lot easier, cutting out 100 calories, 200 calories, even 500 calories than what you're typically eating versus you're going to have to exercise for an hour to 2 hours consistently if you want to burn 500 calories. So the way I approach it is if you understand, the ins and outs, and obviously there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just calories in, calories out. That's just the equation. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that people want to make sure that they're aware of. But one is controlling your diet, eating a high protein diet. 2 is if you want to do exercise, generally the best thing to do is some form of strength training or resistance training because that's going to help you maintain the muscle mass that you have. Because when you go on a caloric deficit, the body wants to break down more muscle protein. So people that want to lose weight, yeah, you want to lose weight, but you want to lose fat. You don't want to lose muscle. So basically the 3 easiest things that I kind of generally tell people without going super in depth is eat a high protein diet, make sure that you're lifting, and you're in somewhat of a caloric deficit, and just walk. The arbitrary 10,000 steps per day, that legitimately is the blueprint to start with. Now, how that gets implemented for each individual person, obviously there's a lot of nuance there.
As we're just thinking about, the fat burning, but how does somebody stop eating a lot? How do you control your appetite? You've been eating, there's food and there's different things and advertisement all around. And, I love a good snack. How do I do that? Like, are there supplements to help me curb my appetite? Like, how does that get done?
I think the first thing is just understanding, what does your normal intake look like? Do you eat at random times during the day? Or is it just ad libitum? Whenever you feel hungry, you just grab something. Because I think some people are just very unaware of how much they end up eating consistently throughout the day. Most people overestimate how much they move and how active they are. They underestimate how many calories they're burning. So I think understanding that, tracking that a little bit, if that is something that is important to you, can raise some awareness. The second is instead of just hodgepodge, I graze all day, I eat random times. It's like some people need structure to what they're doing. Everybody has a busy schedule, everybody has fixed obligations, but if there are times during the day which seem ideal or opportune to eat, we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of those times. And what those meals or those feedings look like, it kind of depends. But if it's higher in protein, if it's higher in fiber, that 1 is going to take a lot longer for it to digest. And 2, it's going to provide a lot more feeling of fullness than if it was higher in carbs and higher in fat, because it's a lot easier to overeat things that are higher in carbs and higher in fat and increase your caloric intake as it is opposed to eating, higher amount of protein. Like if you told somebody, like, here's 10 ounces of chicken breast, you can't eat anything else until you finish that. They're going to be pretty full after eating that. So what that does is it starts curbing the rest of the day of what they're going to end up eating. So if you can kind of control for when somebody's eating and what they're eating, it makes it a lot more sense. So the 2 biggest things that you would want to try to work on is eat less often and eat less. So the way to do that is put some structure in place, eat things that you need, but are also filling, that aren't going to, have you hungry in an hour to say, oh, I just ate, but I need a snack because, hey, my body's telling me I'm hungry because I didn't eat something that was very filling.
Teak, what's your typical diet? How are you eating throughout the day? I think saw something on Instagram or social media, pre-baby, post having a kid. So what was your diet like, and your structured feeding times before your kiddo and then after your kiddo?
Yeah. So before, obviously, as you guys know, I don't have to be responsible for somebody else, so I can eat whenever I want to. So I generally work out in the mornings. I transitioned when I was with the Giants. That was the easiest way to make sure that I got it done, because the rest of the day was crazy. So I'm one of those people that if I'm lifting and I'm lifting hard, I like eating before training, just because, my small Indian frame, I want to maintain as much muscle mass and have strength. Like, I need all the energy I can get. So I would eat. It wouldn't be a big meal. So it's not this massive grand meal. It could be like a banana with some honey. I'm eating a protein shake, a little bit of collagen, get my caffeine, and then I'm out the door. It's not a huge amount of food, but it has the appropriate macros that are right for me. Get my training done, and then first meal of the day, breakfast. So high protein. I always make sure I'm checking the box with how much protein I need, and then did I train? Cool, I can have some carbs in because it's going to be advantageous for me at that time. So generally would end up being, some eggs or, some meat, just a combination to hit at least like 50 or 60 grams of protein, maybe some potato or oatmeal or fruit, and then, creatine and all my post-recovery supplements. And then that's generally 2 feedings before noon. And then what I try to do is get 2 more after noon. So in and around this 2 o'clock time frame, because, work is busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. I don't have time to just sit and like, hey, let me make this meticulous little meal in the kitchen. It's like, no, man, I just did it here. I've got my shake, I've got, bowl of oatmeal, some fruit, eat some, raw carrots and veggies. It took me 5 minutes to put that together. And then dinner is around 6 p.m. where, we're cooking for the family, whether it's my girlfriend, whether it's myself, because I love cooking. It's like a therapeutic thing for me. Again, it always starts with protein. Like, what is our main focus? What is the protein going to be? Are we making chicken? Are we making, ground beef? Are we, cooking up salmon? And then what are the sides that are going to complement that? What kind of vegetable we need? What kind of starch do we need? So trying to make it as simple as possible. So my rule of thumb before was generally that, 4 feedings within 12 hours, following somewhat of a time restricted eating rule, eat when the sun goes up, kind of finish when the sun goes down, because what the research shows that's just advantageous for the body to stay on its circadian rhythms and function the way that it wants to. Post baby, there's no pre-training nutrition. I wake up, he's up at 7. I do the first feed. So feed him, burp him. He's generally, pooping in my hands. I got to change him. And then while he's kind of like gathering himself and I'm getting his stuff ready, because right now, luckily, his grandma's watching him during the day. He's going to daycare next week for the first time. So it's kind of like a big step for us. Like we're handing him off to strangers, and it's like,
I'm not crying, you're crying.
Yeah, I'm not crying. The baby's crying.
It's tough.
Yeah. It is. So, in and around the time that he's kind of like playing and before he takes his first nap, because I get him on the road, before his nap or during, I'm slamming just caffeine really quickly, just because, I need to get up and go. I love caffeine. I'm a fast metabolizer. I've done all the, nutrition genome sequencing. So that kind of like starts my day. That's my ritual. And then when he's dropped off, I come back home. I crank out that 20-minute workout. Now I don't have the luxury to be an hour in the gym. Like, hey, I've already lost a couple of hours a day, taking care of my child. I have 20 minutes, 30 minutes because, I need to make sure I'm ready to start doing work, with the businesses. It's finished work. So breakfast looks very similar to what I told you guys about. The midday lunch, which I just kind of had, is very similar. And so is dinner. So now instead of eating 4 meals in 12 hours, I'm cleaving off that first one. And my first meal is around maybe 10 a.m. Last meal is at 6 p.m. So inadvertently, I am intermittent fasting, even though that wasn't necessarily what I intended to do. But it seems to be working because, like, you know what it is when you're a new father, or you're a second-time father or a third-time father, sleep is non-existent. And I'm not going to worry about that. Look, the priority is taking care of the kids, but I can control my effort in trying to get in a workout. I can control getting in steps during the day, and then I can control what my nutrition looks like. And, so far the nutrition's been on par. Obviously, I've lost some size and muscle mass. That's obviously going to be the goal the second I can get back into the gym on a little bit of a normal schedule, but that's how I've kind of been able to navigate that. And to honestly, like, I feel really good. You know, I don't look my best. I'm not at the highest fitness level, but yeah. So honestly, like, I do feel really good. You know, people are always like, oh, how's the sleep? Oh, are you sleep deprived? I'm like, well, yeah, just because I'm not getting, you know, an 89, 90 sleep score on my aura, but you know, my body's adjusted. Like, look, this is what it is right now. And if I can control what it is I can control to make me feel as good as possible in the moment, I'm going to do that because I want to show up. I want to be here for my family. I want to be here for my son. I want to continue to progress with, you know, what we're doing from a business side.
Well, speaking of pre and post, you got the chance to work with Benny in college and then later in the pros. How was Super Bowl champion Benny Fowler different when you saw him in New York than when you guys parted ways at Michigan State?
He was very different. Physically, he was very similar. You know, Benny has definitely always put a lot of time and attention into working really hard from a physical perspective. In college, I think he just wasn't as open-minded to like, hey, now, you know, this is me. This is my livelihood. If I want to make sure that I'm making money in the NFL as a receiver, you know, unfortunately, not a lot of guys get that wide receiver one payday money. Everybody else is kind of fighting and scrapping to be able to just be relevant and stay on a roster, having to take up a lot of the special teams duties. So when I heard we signed him, I was like, oh my God, like this is so surreal to me because Benny and I got along really well when we were at Michigan State. I mean, we spent a lot of time together in the locker room, in the weight room, just all around the facility. So it was definitely a lot harder to get him to try to implement some strategies in college, just because that's just the price for admission for when you're working with collegiate athletes. They just don't have as much experience in the realm. They haven't been exposed to as much. But I mean, he went to a really good situation with Denver. There are a lot of vets, so you get a chance to. I'm sure he saw a lot of different things. Like, okay, if I want to be successful and perform at a high level, and you know, I'm not Peyton Manning, so I'm not number one on the totem pole. Like, I got to do what I got to do to stick around. So when we had signed him and he was there, like the things that we started talking about, I'm like, oh my God, like he's very knowledgeable. He's asking me questions that he never would have asked me, you know, 4, 5, 6 years ago. So I was definitely very impressed. So honestly, having Benny as an advocate and being able to work with him with what we were trying to do from an implementation standpoint was a lot easier in the league, which I was very happy to see because he definitely developed into that professional.
NFL will do that to you. You know, when you get cut the first couple times, you put all the things in place that you can. You get all the resources and you use all the resources within a team. Teak, I'd love to talk a little bit about your time in the NFL and what you really learned about performance. What did you learn about performance and nutrition more so in the NFL that you didn't have an understanding for before you got there?
I think everything is so very much interconnected. Like obviously nutrition is important, but what somebody might be lacking might not necessarily just be nutrition. So what we were forced to do, or what the situation forced us to do, was really look deep into a variety of different areas and try to see what is it that we can bring to the table for the athletes. Because as you know, it's a very finite amount of time where we might be on a coaching staff, especially in New York, where there's been a significant amount of turnover in a variety of different areas. And then with the players on the roster, there was a lot of turnover too. So we're trying to make big improvements and get a lot of buy-in in a short amount of time, because we might have a player for a week or a year or, you know, a couple games, or we might only be around for a year because they cycled through 2 GMs, 3 head coaches during my time there. So for us, it was being very intentional with how much can we learn about a player individually, about their health status, not only from the outside, because NFL loves external metrics. How strong is this guy? How tall is he? What is his body fat percentage? How fast is he? You know, what are the metrics saying? How fast does he run on game day? All that stuff is very important. But when you get to the league, everybody's strong and fast. That's not really what people need to be working on to really get a leg up. A lot of it really has to do with the mental status and what the internal health status is. So what we were able to do is make sure that we were putting tests and assessments together to learn about each individual player and what is it that they need to be successful, or what might be holding them back. So I had not been exposed to that or been forced to think about things that way, and getting a chance to, obviously, Benny, you know, Wellman very well too. Probably, you know, one of the smartest guys that I've ever had the chance to work with. He has a huge amount of knowledge in strength and conditioning and all things developing athletes from a physical standpoint. But I wanted to meld what we were trying to do from a testing and implementation standpoint, hydration, nutrition, supplementation, to make sure that that overlapped really closely. So the recommendations that we had for each individual player, like, hey, this is how you need to supplement. Do you need to start monitoring HRV? Do you want to talk about sleep hygiene, and monitor that yourself? Do we need to do some additional advanced blood work testing? That way we can see what it is that needs to be worked on. So that's kind of how I've taken my health approach from what we were doing with the Giants to kind of transition out and work more closely with people in like more of a one-on-one setting. So it's not just having these preconceived notions about everybody needs to fast, everybody needs to, work out this way, everybody needs to take these supplements. It's everybody is so inherently different just from a baseline genetic standpoint, but how you grew up, like where you live, the things you do on a daily basis from a lifestyle perspective, those epigenetic factors also influence your overall health status very strongly. So looking at all these different factors allow you to really start layering in, like, what exactly should this person be doing? Like, how can they eat? How much should they be eating? What should they be supplementing with? What does the training look like? And obviously for NFL players, there's a specified amount of training and things that need to be done. But for normal people, you have a wider range of things that are kind of now open as options.
Sticking in the NFL, I know what it sounds like. Benny knows what it sounds like in the NFL when a coach wants you to play. And because, nutrition and health, that's not just off the field. That's on the field too. And I always say, only in the NFL do you hear the phrase, are you hurt or are you injured, right? That's crazy to me that you hear that. But illuminate for us, what does it sound like when those doors are closed, players are away, when a coach wants to get a player on the field who's not ready yet? What does it sound like in those rooms?
Oh boy. Yeah. Like to me, in our positions, we really didn't have a lot of say in that. It was like, hey, this is the decision that's been made, whether the player makes the decision or the coach is like, they need to be on the field. Regardless, it's like, what can I do in this moment just to make sure that this player is recovering properly, just has enough energy to get through the practice to be ready for game day. I think that's just the catch-22 that a lot of coaches and practitioners find themselves. Like you don't want to play both sides. It's not a great place to be in. I think a lot of staff members and coaches get kind of trapped in that situation where they don't have any control over it. It's either the player just makes the decision for everybody and or the coach forces and leverages that decision. And if it's a player, again, a fringe player who is really fighting for a roster spot, they can't just say, well, no, I'm out. Because what's going to happen? Well, the GM's going to say, hey, we're going to replace this person and find somebody else to take up the slack. So it's definitely a catch-22 and you get thrown between a rock and a hard place, but you can only do so much. Just it's always about supporting the athlete and at least trying to get them to that stage and then helping them get through, the game, so to speak.
Teague, did you ever become numb to that, or, how do you handle that? Because there's a human element of it, and I'll never forget my last year with the Giants. I had one of my best preseasons, was like third or fourth on the team in receptions and then got cut twice in the same season. And I'll never forget the GM just be like, hey, it's just your turn. And that didn't even make any sense to me. Like, I was always on time. I was a great presence in the locker room. How is it like that on the other side for you in terms of seeing players get cut or hearing these things in these meetings when it just doesn't make any sense?
It's tough. It's not only from a personal standpoint where you and I had a relationship going back to like 2012 and knowing that working with you was a lot easier than working with some of the other players, and not just because of the relationship, just because of the buy-in you had. And, you didn't give us a lot of grief. You know how it is. Players like to push back and test the limits that they can. But also, we have our own perceptions of what the roster can potentially look like, who's doing well, who isn't. But that's definitely a different eye than what the GM sees or what the head coach sees or what a coordinator sees, because they're probably privy to a lot more information in terms of, cap space, future plans, designations, things of that nature that we don't get to see. So sometimes a lot of decisions are made, whether it's the right or wrong one, and we're sitting here thinking like, man, that probably wasn't the best decision. Or we bring in a player that's, consistently causing problems, not buying in with the potential, has a high amount of potential, but, is a high amount of risks too. To me, it was just a very difficult situation to be in. But ultimately, since I didn't have any power or leverage to really do anything, you kind of just go along with the flow. And unfortunately, it's like that, within every team.
Diving out of football, T, as I've transitioned out of football, Ryan has transitioned out of football. we do pay attention a lot to health, wellness, longevity, and performance, but there's so much information out there now. There's so much information out there. Where do we start? Where do people start? Where, the people that you're working with in startups or entrepreneurs or these corporate companies, these people don't have all the knowledge that we have, but now you have the Huberman podcast, you have Dr. Hyman. I mean, you have all these people talking about all these things in health, wellness, and longevity. Where do people start in terms of getting the right information?
It's a great question because it's always been information overload. Now it's taken it to another level because every medium has more information coming out and is trying to either push a certain thought process or a bias. So for me, what I like to educate people on is just really understanding your own personal situation and not trying to compare yourself to others or just listening to something and immediately putting yourself in that situation. I think that's one of the biggest things, because most people just really don't know much about their health, and then they're trying to fix too many things all at once. If you start with very simple things, it's like, okay, if we're talking about overall health, like, do you know about your own individual health status? Like, have you been to the doctor? Do you have a physical? Do you have blood work? Do you know anything about your fitness levels? Do you know anything about your stress resiliency or recovery? Do you know anything about, sleep? I think these are general things that have the highest amount of ROI with when it comes to health. And then obviously adding layers on top of that with, how should I work out? What kind of supplements should I take? What's the best specific diet for me? I think is really, really important. Instead of everybody wants the new flavor of the week. Everybody wants to talk about what the media is perpetuating or what Netflix is showing on a documentary or, what these big influencers that have become really big are saying, telling people they have to do some of these crazy things that aren't very sustainable or realistic. But I think the biggest thing is just really starting to understand where you're at and potentially where you want to go and making it realistic. I interact with a lot of different people, a lot of different clients where they might be 50, 60 years old and they're like, yeah, hey, I want to lose 50 pounds and I want to be 10% body fat. And I'm like, that's probably not going to happen. Everybody has this fixated image of what they think they should be as opposed to what it is that they actually want to be.
Well, and Teak, for me, to wrap things up, I just wanted to ask you, beyond fitness and health, you have an amazing story and you kind of touched on it. You're the odd person when anybody looks at you in high school. You definitely, I can't imagine there have been a ton of Indian trainers and health officials in the NFL. So you're a pioneer in that regard. You had to learn an entire skill set that you didn't live initially in your sedentary lifestyle. What did you tell yourself in moments after moments you found yourself in that were a new environment that required you to do and learn new things?
I think for me, it's just consistently just having a belief in myself, even if I didn't have the answers, and really just being very patient and asking for help with the people that I felt closest or strongest to or had the best relationship with. So, transitioning from football in college to the NFL was definitely a big difference because, as you guys both know, it definitely is a business. Now, there are so many different factors that are impacting the decisions that get made on a day-to-day basis that you don't see in college. It definitely is different now with, NIL and all that other stuff, but, I haven't coached in college since 2016, so I never got a chance to experience that. I think just really just having a very strong internal drive and, consistently telling myself like, hey, even though you might mess up or you might not know something right now, you can always figure it out and adjust on the fly, be very adaptable, just keep taking care of yourself, have a high amount of energy, and, just be there and be consistent and show up day after day after day. And slowly things will start falling into place. So year one was definitely very difficult for me. That was 2017. The Giants had just come off of a playoff appearance. Coach McAdoo was coming into a second year. There were high hopes for the team. The media in New York, as Benny knows all about them, they were saying, hey, this could potentially be a Super Bowl season because the Giants have a really good defense. You sign a couple pieces on offense, you retool it. Odell is a top 3 receiver in the league at that time. And then, you lose a few games and everything snowballs and the locker room's unhappy and there's grumblings about changing the head coach and the GM and the head coach get fired. So, that was a big eye opener to me to say, okay, this might not last very long. I might be a one and done in the league. So I don't want to not push myself or do whatever I can for the players, for the organization, and then look back and say, oh, well, it's not my fault. We didn't win. Everybody got fired. So, why should I work hard? And that's where, came into the mix, met with Benny in 2018. And I think my best work was actually in 2018, where we had just this massive stretch of the majority of the roster available. And that's one of the biggest things as a performance staff is how many games lost to injury do we have? And are we reducing that so we can have as many of our best players able to play every day on Sunday or whenever game day is?
So important. Teak, man, really appreciate you taking the time. If there's one thing, can you share your social media accounts so people can find you and follow you?
Yeah, my Twitter X, Instagram, and LinkedIn is at Pratik X Patel. So it's PRATIK X PATEL.
And if there's one thing that you would love to just share with the audience in terms of health, wellness, longevity, what's the one thing that you would want to share with the audience?
I think everybody has the power to really make a huge amount of impact within their own health. And the approach that I take that it seems to work for a lot of people that I work with is look at things from an internal and external perspective. So try to test, look at your individual situation as often as possible and really get a chance to take that information and apply it to your own life.
Awesome. Everybody, this is Pratik Patel. Pratik, thanks for joining the Gridiron Growth Podcast, man. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Congrats, too.